few moments of your time.
I think we need to mute everyone.
Yes, I will mute everyone, and then please you would have to unmute yourselves one by one. Mushin, you would have to unmute yourself. Could you do that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to episode 6 rather, of Point to Ponder at the Grey Lounge. And like always, we have our esteemed guests from various parts of the world right now. And today we have a very interesting topic. And by the sound of it, it may seem a bit alarming, but I think we're in safe hands when I look around in the room, and these gentlemen could keep us safe from the threatening technologies. The way the topic goes, integrating threatening technologies into society, and we will ask our gentlemen how that topic befits today's conversation, and they would of course help us through this. And from here onwards, I would ask Raza Bhai to carry on with the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Subir. Warm welcome to all our listeners from around the globe. Once again, we have some esteemed guests joining us. We have our resident Will Marcus and Mushin Schilling, and then the new member, Sergei, joining us. Sergei is somebody that I've heard so much about over so many years, but first time I'm actually interacting with him, and it's an absolute delight, something that I've been looking forward to for several weeks now. So as a formal introduction, Will, if you could actually introduce Sergei, and then we'll pass it over to Sergei to talk about our topic today.
Thank you, Raza. Thanks, Zubi. I'd like to just briefly introduce Sergei by way of the fact that he and I are partners in this business of commercializing what some people describe as threatening technologies, even though that could be arguably described as an oxymoron. No technology is threatening unless you know how to introduce it into society without harm. And I think that's basically the premise of what we're going to talk about tonight. But Sergei is a agricultural scientist, would that be right to say, Sergei? But specializing in information management. I'll leave you to describe yourself better, mate. I've known you so long, I don't know you at all. It's weird, isn't it? But if you can take yourself off mute, Sergei, and just talk a little bit about yourself for a bit so people can understand who you are and where you come from. And then you might want to launch into that broad subject matter of how you introduce technologies. Before we go into that, I might just say that whenever a new technology is introduced into society, there's often a group or an industry that is disenfranchised. They lose their power, they lose their money, their cash flow, because the new technology is better, faster, more beautiful, whatever it is, and so they're pushed to the side. And so that can cause a lot of fracturing. And in fact, if it's already a very and just say it's in energy, for example, and there are very powerful lobby groups there, then they can resist the new technology and subvert it so that they don't lose traction in the marketplace, let's put it that way. And so that's the terms of the threat that we're sort of, the title of this Point to Ponder is discussing. And so there are bringing in new technologies is a bit of an art form, and I'll let Sergei talk more about this so that he can understand better. Sergei, over to you, mate.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. First, introducing myself, I suppose, and after such a delineation of what we're going to discuss today, it's will made my task real difficult because on one side I have system background. I have blend of computers, management, technology, and more recently I dealt with projects developing new technologies. And when this transition for me happened, I couldn't help but realize how important it is to look at social issues associated with introduction of new technology. And I suppose bottom line is it going to go or is it not going to go? And especially in commercial environment, how do you introduce a new technology that might be threatening? And I will give examples of our projects that we are undertaking now, developing new technologies. And a good example is new type of distributed energy system. We are all talking about distributed energy systems as, in a way, panacea for our energy solution. But at the same time, we are restricting introduction of new systems, and that creates a problem. In relation to new distributed energy resources, we are at the point of creating island systems that are independent of grid, for example. So one of our projects is actually developing energy system for an island, which is totally independent from the mainland supply of power. Somebody can say, well, that's easy. You just connect solar panels and they'll do the job. But this is not easy when you have to provide power supply in the vicinity of 2 to 3 megawatts. It's very difficult because you have businesses that depend on energy, you have people, you have other issues that you have to look at. And so going and introducing something like that imposes some issues that are not to do with technology, because technically we can do that. But it's the way people are going to accept it or not accept it. It's the way that government structures will allow certification of the equipment. It's the way competition is going to handle the fact that eventually it is threatening their part of the market. So how do you introduce something like that? And as Will mentioned, new technology tend to be threatening, and it imposes threats, social, financial threat. In introducing our projects, what we are trying to do, we are trying to construct collaborative models that involve existing business structures, existing finances. We are not rushing it through, and I suppose that's the main message I would like to sort of put up for discussion. It's a gentle introduction, not gaining immediate benefits from the market, but allowing gentle introduction that will give us not only financial benefits now, but it will create long-term development, regional development, social development. And if we're thinking in a broad sense, I think that's where the solution lies. I'm not presenting any solution. I'm sharing with you my thoughts on the topic, and that's, I suppose, the bottom line. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, it's you know, I like the way Sergei puts this, that you know, that the so-called threatening technologies are introduced harmlessly into society and into commerce. Because it's all about the perceived harm. You know, what is harm, and if you have an excellent technology that is, say, better for the environment or cheaper to do or works better than the current technology, you'd be surprised how difficult it is to bring it into reality, to commercialize it, because of the competing interests who don't want to lose their the basis of their world, really. And so this gentle introduction that Sergei discusses is not as simply as just doing it a little bit in one place and then another. There's quite a lot of subtlety involved, and I suppose the best way to describe that is through examples. And I guess there are a few threatening technologies that we plan to implement in the Islamabad Global Leisure City project, and that if we talk about them in that relation, that might be the best way for everyone to understand. Otherwise, we're talking at very high level. It doesn't sort of really connect. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense, Sergei? Maybe you want to talk first about. Let's talk first about the water aspect. Is that fair?
Well, I think we're talking about. I started talking about energy, and I'd rather continue on that because I think it is a good example. Good example because it introduces so many challenges. Challenges are not only related to technical aspect of producing green energy. The challenges of a different kind. For example, in one of the projects, our projects, what we do, we create microgrid based on single conductor wire. It's a technology that enables us to transmit energy over long distances without with minimum resistance, with minimum losses. And it's quite common that losses in a grid, conventional grid, work out to be around 10-15%. And customer is paying for it. It's maintenance, so-called maintenance costs. In our systems, we have, for example, losses along the single conductor wire is about 0.5% for 100 kilometers. So we are immediately significantly reducing costs of associated technology, transformers, huge wires. And because it's a single conductor wire, if it's broken, there is no threat to life. It is broken. There is no any implication to threats to life. So, for example, that technology in itself is quite a revolutionary. So we can introduce that technology readily in our project. We are doing that. Just imagine the benefits you can get in constructing grid networks based on single conductor wire. And again, there are different attempts to develop single conductor wire grids. And I think what we've done, we have learned from mistakes of previous attempts, and what we are delivering is actually a network that has capacity, multi-channel capacity. So what it does, it transmits the status of energy. It doesn't transmit the energy itself. It doesn't transmit the current itself. And therefore, the wire is about 2 millimeters in diameter. So it's not a huge type of infrastructure cost. But another thing, it's actually not only transmitting, but it's also receiving. So it's dual channel, multiple channel. So we can get a status from a consumer and we can ascertain what is happening. And based on that, we can construct new market systems for people actually actively participating in trading the energy. So that's another very interesting aspect. So introduction of new technology doesn't need to be necessarily threatening. What it brings with itself depends on how many people are going to receive benefits and how difficult it is to change consciousness of people and understanding. How can we introduce that? And that's probably the most important part I see, not the technical part. Technically, we can do a lot of things immediately right now. So, Will, with regards to new project, for example, Islamabad project, that idea, that application alone can bring not only energy benefits, but also skills. It can build potential for development. It can bring so many positives. And so focusing on positives and developing technology, that's how I see the gentleness of introduction in creating alliances with people, building the foundation in social understanding, and technical achievements are going to come. So
I guess the challenge is always there, because on your social sort of conscience on one side against commercial gain from the other side. You know, some of the industries that we're talking about, you know, any challenge to their status quo or their sort of commercialism is always going to be the big challenge there. Well, but I do like this idea of collaborative, this Trojan horse tactics where you penetrate the market and work from within.
Yeah, but also talking about big boys who are selling wires and who are installing transformers. Now, what we have this transition period to greener and cleaner energy. And what is obvious, that big boys, they cannot provide stable power supply. So it is in their interest to stabilize. And what we are offering is actually giving the opportunity to stabilize entire network. So in a way, we are working for them, because their expenditure in stabilization, what they're going to do is install huge batteries, and huge batteries require enormous amount of resources to maintain. So it's going to be at their expense. And so I think the balance can be found even there, you know. So, and there are different commercial models as well. So, yeah.
In a country like Pakistan, the challenge is enormous, because power energy is such an issue over there. You know, during the height of the summer, the load shedding, as they call it, is down as much as 12 hours at times, where people don't have any energy at all. So solving that issue alone would, you know, the government itself would welcome any assistance on that matter.
I'll bring another example. Sorry, Will. Another example then. When you look at expenditure of energy in a household, for example, and we take, well, summer period, you need air conditioning, you need light, you need food, you need water, whether it's going to be hot water, and you need hot water, so you're going to have hot water, and some sort of refrigeration. Now, if we remove the light and electricity used in the lighting of a place, and different appliances, it's about 70%, from 60 to 70% of the household energy is used for hot water, most intensive energy consuming tasks, functions, hot water, air conditioning, or heating. So these are the major. What we have, in our island, for example, project, and why I like and refer to island project all the time, because in a way it's a demonstration of technology. It's presentation of what is possible. And if we can, in an island project, we are taking care of that 70% with different technologies. So we are not drawing our grid capacity to fulfill those functions of households and commercial and businesses. And so even separation of tasks and bringing different technology for different purposes, combining them together into entire system, provides us with possible solutions without threatening anyone. So that's another way of doing it.
I think what's key to this particular energy technology, and we're sort of being vague about it because there's intellectual property involved that we can't discuss in any detail, but the beauty of it is that, as you say, Raza, the Trojan horse approach can be used very, very effectively. But more importantly, there's a way of introducing this technology into the existing energy world without threatening any of the infrastructure. And I think one of the big threats is that there are trillions of dollars in the world invested in power generation plants and the wires and the poles that move it all the way around into cities and around the countryside. And you can't just replace that overnight with another technology because it has to repay itself. So this particular technology will actually supplement very elegantly that existing system. And so any shortfalls in the existing system can be made good. And we would hope that eventually, and this is where Islamabad Global Leisure City comes in, is that there's an opportunity to showcase the technology in its purity. And so people can see it functioning. And because it's a new city and there's no vested interest already in power supply, because let's face it, we're basically going to generate the consumer population. It starts from zero, so no one technically or abstractly owns that consumer base. You can move in with a technology like this and not undermine anyone else's particular income base. And we would hope that the model of the Islamabad Global Leisure City power supply and distribution is so entrancing to the industry as a whole that they would start to talk to us about using it themselves. And so despite the fact that I look like a megalomaniac up here in my outer space in the office, we have no intention to rule the world. We want this technology.
Do we have this technology installed elsewhere at the moment?
It's not in a system in a grid, but the technology exists in a functioning sense in a laboratory. And the theory of it is pretty straightforward. Sergei, do you want to answer that?
I just want to, Zubi, it's we have technology ready for certification. So that's at the state of certification. We are not going through the certification process yet, but the technology itself is ready for certification. And another interesting thing about that single conductor wire technology, and I seem to be talking about that all the time, we got lots of other projects, but it's just an interesting feature that the network itself becomes like an internet in a way. Like I mentioned, it's got several channels in a way. And what it does, it acts as a network. In that network, it is responsive to needs of other people and surpluses of the nodes of the network. And it is rearranging itself, it's balancing itself. So if we take a microgrid connected to the major grid supply, what it does, it actually draws some energy from major grid, but then it rebalances it and maintains at a manageable level. It doesn't go, yes, we need peak supply and we need a lot of energy, and then suddenly, oh, we don't need anything else. There is no fluctuation. So what we are doing, we are helping the bigger guys to actually manage the load properly. So the whole country, the whole region benefits from it. So, and that's, anyway, that's just a point I wanted to make.
But I think the point maybe we should make is that the single wire technology is such a genius a thing to have mastered, that it distributes the energy efficiently. There's incredible, there's not much power loss in the transmission. 15% is a lot of power loss in anyone's language in the standard systems. That just that alone, the efficiency of distribution means that you don't have to create as much energy for distribution. I don't know how far you want to go down that rabbit hole, Sergei, with the actual generation of electricity, but we have some Trojan horses, let's put it that way, for creating the energy and handing it over. Did you want to talk about maybe the solar vehicle charging stations? Does that that might be a nice sort of manageable model for people to understand?
Well, that's another technology that we have, because what we are doing, we're introducing a system, and the system has to have elements familiar to people, usable. We can't just connect things with a single conductor wire and say, well, here we are, and people can't use it in their appliances at home. Or there is no real benefits, for example, in terms of charging electric vehicles. And in our system, we do have electric vehicle ultra-fast charging stations that are based and connected to single conductor wire technology. They are extremely efficient, and they range. If we say ultra fast, what I mean by ultra fast, it's 120 kilowatts to 250 kilowatts, and we are currently working on 360 kilowatts, which is more industrial grade charging stations for buses and future trucks. The line actually starts from a 60 kilowatt, 30 and 60 kilowatt systems that are used for individual households. And so what we have associated technologies, and another bit of technology is, of course, converter. When a single wire comes to a single household, it goes through a conversion process, and then it's used in a house in the usual format, consumer format. It might be 220 volts. It's used like that. So there is no visible change to the consumer. So the energy transfer is very efficient, but for consumer, it is transparent.
Can I underline one of the problems with electric vehicle consumptions around the planet that needs to be resolved and isn't quite yet, and that's kind of underscored. And I don't know the facts and figures, and Sergei, just jump in if you feel like you have some data on this. But anecdotally, if everyone was suddenly to have an electric vehicle instead of a diesel or petrol operated car or truck, then Firstly, we wouldn't have enough power generation on the planet to provide the energy to get all the vehicles going. Now, the power generation in itself is not a problem. You just put on more power generation plants, whether they're nuclear or coal-fired or any of the green systems. You just make more of them. That could be done fairly quickly. But the big issue is that the infrastructure that distributes the power to all the people consuming it in their garages, charging their cars at night, is so inadequate that it'd probably take a decade or two to replace it. All the wires, I think someone described it as if that draw was to happen right now on the existing system, if the system was adequate to supply the energy requirements, then all of the high tension power lines, all the cables in running down the street or under the footpath would all start melting and dripping and falling down and electrocuting people. It's just, the load would be just so significant. And so this technology, with its transmission capacity, eliminates that particular threat of not being able to transfer the energy through to the user. Sergei?
Well, I just have immediate threat here. My dog is coming to eat me. No,
introduce your dog to Zubi's cat.
He's going to add to our conversation on energy. No, what I would like to add, Will, it's not easy to generate. I mean, there are huge problems in generating the energy because, like you said, power plants, additional power plant, it's about 5 years. You need about 5 years or 4 or 5 years to construct a power plant. Okay, then you have to deal with surplus of energy and sudden influx of demand. How are you going to deal with that? What kind of system, distribution system you are going to have to accommodate instability within the network? So technical issues I don't want to go into now, but there are serious technical issues. And one of those is making more efficient devices, more efficient solutions. And I think what we've got through technology that we are developing is one of those. I'm not claiming it's be the only one, but it's one of the most efficient things that I know of, and so that is an opportunity for us to introduce it and develop it. Yep.
But do you think the existing infrastructure that we have currently installed everywhere, would that infrastructure work for converting it from the previous technology to the new one, or would this technology require a totally new infrastructure?
Yeah, good question. Good question. And I think there are two aspects to it. One aspect is the technology we have now is roughly 150 years old conceptually, right? We are running old technology. If you go along the street of a populated area, you see transformers hanging on the power poles every 700 meters or so, right? Just imagine losses of power that we have in that inefficiency. We have thick wires transmitting the power. Do we need to replace all of that at once? No, we don't. What we can do, we can introduce technology in new developed areas. With regards to old areas, what we can do, we can use other bit of our technology that will enable saving power used by individual consumers. So we can work together. And for example, our systems are compatible with current systems. So there is no issue of immediate, scrapping it and losing investment, No, let's use it, but let's make next steps. Let's map the road where we want to be. And that's the gradual introduction of technology, because technology.
I guess introducing it into the Islamabad Global City project, we can highlight the technology and bring it in independent of any existing structure, because we're starting with a blank canvas.
Yeah, true. I agree. But I'm thinking on the lines that because see, once a technology comes into a country like Pakistan, it's going to be like fire in the. Everybody's going to ask for it, and everybody they're going to demand it. And the immediate questions that would come up from everywhere would be that I just asked, that is do they work on a common infrastructure? Do they require specialized infrastructure? And B, let's say IGLC initiates this and puts this technology and models it and pilots it. Is there also a possibility, just like a hybrid system of solar into AC and other means into alternate?
Absolutely, yes. We thought about the dynamic system. It's not this or nothing, or it's a lot of flexibility in the system, because we can work with existing solar panels, solar farms. We can work with existing grid facilities. We can use existing infrastructure to supply the energy, but at a reduced rate. So the overall grid infrastructure in the region, for example, would benefit from stability. So with that, okay, what we're going to have situation when bigger boys are going to lose a little bit of, well, some money, because they're going to less electricity. No, just listen to the end. Less electricity. But if we work together and not opposed to big boys, but start working together, that will give them opportunity to actually expand to new regions they could not go to before that. Because a lot of regions now, like in regional Australia, there is no good sort of distribution lines going out west. And so townships have some problems with energy supply. And so what they have an opportunity to take innovations to those places, together with us, of course, but increase stability and increase number of people and amount of energy. So it's a trade-off. If you think about it, currently we are focusing in a large metropolitan areas, and we're thinking about stability there because the voter majority lives there. But we forget about regions. Let's involve regions. Let's give them stability. And what it does, it will bring those regions to life. Businesses, it will create opportunities, educational opportunities for people. It will start, generating effects for community. And that, I think that is exciting thing. That is the most exciting thing.
Can I expand on something that Sergei just said before, which I think is very interesting and needs to be underscored, and that is that this technology is not a takeover style technology. It has the potential to be so, but it works so happily. It plays in the playing field. It's not a bully. It goes out there and it cooperates with all of the different energy systems and enhances them. Even though in its own right it can stand alone. And in terms generally of introducing threatening technologies into the field, I think that form of approach, rather than saying, here we are, we're better, subscribe to us and not to them, gives you a situation where you've got a lot of infrastructure and business that is disenfranchised and therefore unhappy with the circumstance. But the infrastructure that's been invested into the planet, it can't be recycled easily or amortized. The cost of it can't be amortized if the new technology usurps it too quickly. And then the third point I want to make is that if this new technology is a fizzer, it looks good, it works at scale in a laboratory, and then you start to wind it out citywide and it does not work, then you haven't harmed anyone, because basically you're enhancing everything else, and all you're failing to do is to make things better. Things will be the same. And I think that's important to understand, that a lot of new technologies, we have this saying here, I'm not sure if it's common everywhere, but there are leading edge technologies, and they're the ones that are working and they're leading in the field. And then there's the bleeding edge technologies, which is the super edge stuff where everyone's getting cut and hurt and damaged, blood's going everywhere. So the bleeding edge technology is where Sergei and I sort of hover, trying to make it commercial, so it comes back to leading edge. And if you have a bleeding edge technology that's no bleeding good, then that's a threat. That is a threat. So the new technology becomes a threat to itself in its implementation. So you have to ensure against that by introducing a threatening technology in such a way that it's like putting your big toe into the boiling water in the bath first before you jump right in. You've just got to make sure everything works, and you settle in, and then you talk to people. And yeah, so it's about the redundancy, of the whole thing. You can't presume to have the perfect solution, because inevitably nothing ever will be. There'll always be issues that you need to manage.
I guess the IP on it and all the legalities of it, we have that covered. So is it something that is protected?
Well,
you know what? It's protected by this.
No, it
Right.
will be protected as soon as it goes into certification. It will be protected. But what I also want to point out that I think everything we do depends on the business model that we have. How are we going to make the money? And I suppose what we are doing now, we are describing in a way the business model that will enhance sustainability, not just like a single criteria, say energy supply. We are looking at a broader scale sustainability, where there is a social coherence and benefits coming to both businesses and the community. And I think largely, if we create businesses that do, maybe it's an altruistic, maybe it's my stupidity, but I would like to see businesses thinking about, how can we engage, and collaborative economies are the best way to go. Best way to develop, avoiding centralized economies, but still working in unison together. And I think as businesses, we can find that golden path. So that's an optimistic view on that.
Okay, one thing I would want to add. Yeah, one more thing I wanted to add.
Okay.
Yeah, see, when the dynamics of Pakistani structure, the structure of the Pakistani state. I mean, I am just going to give you a hint and something to look forward to in terms of bringing a technology into Pakistan. A country like Pakistan, particularly people know that are now currently in this room, what they like to have and what they do not like to have. If you keep these two things, and you could probably bring the technology immediately into Pakistan. A is that they would never want a monopoly of a company or a structure or even a technology that. So how to overcome that is that they ask for the transfer of technologies. What they immediately would ask you or anybody is that, okay, we like the technology, we like the concept, we like it. 10 years, 20 years ahead into future. But would it be possible that project of Islamabad Leisure City becomes so big that instead of importing technology, you transfer the technology and make it indigenously here, the whole structure, and then start to sell it from Pakistan to abroad, so that Pakistan would start generating revenue, and also that they would not be dependent on a monopolized system?
Spoken like a true consumer, Zubi.
Can I just enter something here?
Yeah.
Can I just?
Mushin.
So what I want to jump into is there is a Bonita Roy and me and a couple of others have developed a system called Open Participatory Organization. Basically, it provides a path where we have the best of the hierarchical world of ordinary organization and the collaborative work of egalitarian, where everybody is kind of their own boss, blah, 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 these things. So the open participatory organization is a concept that works to look at that particular part. And basically what it turns organizations into is loose affiliations of people that make promises and keep promises and keep account of all the mass of those things in an open way. So that I, as a person, if I contribute to that particular organization, I don't become a member of that organization. I don't become a workforce of that organization. I just contribute to that organization, and the organization contributes back to my welfare financially or with insurance or whatever that is, what it contributes back to me. So in an open participatory organization model, basically what you can do is distribute merit, which is kind of basically the other part of doing business, getting a good reputation, and creating a financial flow that makes ownership in a decentralized work somehow easier. Because Sergei kind of, he mentioned that in a way as a sideline, but basically a distributed net is almost like a distributed organization, like a distributed social system. And we all have this incredible difficulty to move away from centralized things, from centralizing aspects, because a decentralization, if you do that well, then you can integrate it well by integrating the people into the organization instead of the other way around, by saying, okay, this is what we can contribute to your life, and this is what you can contribute to the organization, and that will cause an economic exchange, which will enrich all of us. Now, that's the kind of way I think we all want to go in the socioeconomic aspect. And I have been researching this so much because JALA is a decentralized financial system. And I said, we can't have a centralized organization running a decentralized system. You get into this kind of thing that Bitcoin, all these difficulties, or that all these cryptocurrencies are in, is because they are centralized and they create a decentralized system. And these two don't work well together unless you have a participatory structure built into the system itself.
Can I give an example of that, Mushin? This is something that I've noticed. One of the technologies that we run is in the mining industry. It's for processing metals. And it's, again, threatening in a sense. But in doing this, I've done a lot of research into the mining industry around the world, and particularly in Australia, because we're very, it's one of our, it's one of our big industries here. And what I've noticed, and I was kind of blessed to know this man personally, Sir James Foots was the head of BHP, which is now known as BHP Billiton. And I was lucky enough to be a neighbour of his and at one stage, and his family, so we got to know them very well. Lovely open man, but to be the executive head of an industry in Australia like this, he wielded a lot of power, and you wouldn't have picked it from the man. He was so gentle. And what he did in the industry here over the last, he's passed on now, may he rest in peace, but what he did to the industry is he transformed it by starting an organisation, a collaborative organisation, where everyone in the industry could share. And so it became very commonplace in Australia in the mining industry for all the miners and the mining processing businesses to openly discuss and share their technologies at these forums, which they would hold regularly. And if someone came up with some intellectual property about, how you can process nickel more effectively out of laterites, then they would all share it. That person would own it, and then he would license the other miners to use it for like a royalty, something very nominal, cents or $1 or $2 per ton for process, to have access to the technology that they spent a long time getting to working out. And so then everyone could share it immediately. And so the mining industry in Australia is remarkable like that. And this is probably why it's so powerful and it's gone global. It's all over the world now, because the technologies, the threatening, so-called potentially threatening technologies, were shared immediately. And so everyone had that capacity. And so the whole industry moved forward very rapidly technologically because they established a very simple and elegant means of equitably sharing the knowledge so that everyone benefited. And I think that's a really good example of what I'm talking about, but applied specifically to an industry. And there's the point that Sergei brought up. Zubi, your question before Mushin, can you just restate that? Because I think that also needs to be pursued.
See, when a new technology, a relatively new technology comes into a market like Pakistan, where the economy is already kind of in the doldrums, I would say. What happens is that when a new technology comes in, the first question that comes up by the existing stakeholders of the country is that this technology would come over, invade, and they would take us out of business. We have invested millions of dollars over the years, and local industry built this particular technology, older technology, has a decent share in managing the economy of the country. So they have every right to come up to the government and object the intrusion of a recently developed technology, which is very reasonable to speak of. But what the country so far, what I've noticed, the state so far has established, working as a consultant with the government, I've realized that they have devised certain the mechanisms for new tech, because we can't, as a state, we can't also deprive people and the country of recent developments happening all over the world also. So they have to build a mean somewhere that makes sense to both the questions, and also generate an equilibrium for the economy to be stable. So what they do is that when a new technology comes in, they give you a proposition. They say, we will give you the room because you could easily be the first one, the pioneers of this technology. So tendering that does not even apply, because there's nobody else to tender with. There's nobody else to compete with. So you come as an unsolicited participant into a system. And when you come as an unsolicited participant, you have to place a lot of guarantees and certifications, the way Sergei was mentioning, and then also you have to assure them that once this technology is brought into the system, the intent of the company or the conglomerate is not to monopolize the concept, but rather to actually revolutionize the concept, so that go at par and at pace with the rest of the world, adapting to this technology. So the state in Pakistan does is that it proposes a solution that if you have enough business coming out of this project or these sort of projects, this business should act somehow up to the magnitude enough for you to bring the structure into our country to indigenously manufacture whatever the parts may be required for this technology or know-how. And if it doesn't, then you can take it away, because that means you're coming here for a certain amount of business and then you're going to walk away. So you have to show that the magnitude of this technology is sufficient for us, the people we're bringing, to be convinced enough to transfer the technology. And secondly, the offshoot of this that they would get and does get is that once it's indigenously manufactured, then they become the regional supplier, and also locking the region at a certain diameter, whatever that the technology owners have to bring in the shape of a work. That once we install this, we will cover these sort of regions as Pakistan, as made in Pakistan label, indigenously manufactured equipment or structure, and then we would generate this much revenue to balance the magnitude of loss that we would incur upon entering into an already destabilized economy because of the political turmoil.
Well, I think what you're saying fits very nicely with what's happening in the mining industry in Australia. And, you know, this is kind of an old model, and it works so successfully for the rapid uptake, and that the technology could easily be licensed to the existing energy providers in Pakistan with no threat. If they wanted to take it up, then we come to some arrangement, and there'd be some very small royalty that would happen on the production, so that they could honour the fact that the IP is being transferred, and then that technology is accessible to everyone in Pakistan. And how they use it from there, it's up to them.
Yeah. Can I add a couple of things, Will? From examples of projects, and we've thought about that, especially with projects. Yes, within Australia, we have to think about carefully about business model and how we are going to operate, but also we are developing a three-stage project at the moment. An island stage is the first one, where we introduce technology, we test technology, we develop a product which is going to be implemented anywhere in the world as an island grid, right? Independent power supply. And that goes immediately to lots of countries in the Philippines, Fiji, anywhere. Replacing, you know, existing generating diesel generators. But it also gives an opportunity to use similar technology in mining towns and so on and so on. So as an independent power supply product, and that's that one thing. Second stage of that project is actually looking at a regional framework. How can we benefit the region? And here it's connection with grid, non-competitiveness, or engagement of existing stakeholders in developing collaborative models. That's exactly what you are saying. But the third stage of that project is going up north and developing power generating facility for export to Indonesia, for example. And we know that we can generate certain capacity, and we can export it using single conductor wire, virtually with very little losses compared to existing huge diameter, you know, structures. We can do that, but then we thought, okay, hold on a minute. There are existing power providers in Indonesia. What we can do, we can reduce the amount of energy supply to, let's say, 5-6% of the country, and then introduce new technology for adoption by existing power suppliers, power generators. So we can facilitate transition of the country to new technology. And I think what similar approach we intend to use, for example, in introduction of charging stations, right? And we had discussions with UK to introduce those charging stations networks, doing exactly the same thing. We don't want to bring technology from there. We want to lease the technology. We want to go partners with existing companies. We want to be part of the business structures of existing business structures, ensuring success. And so our success, but also overall regional and country success. So I think that's the model we are considering.
I think moving on to the other technology, if we may, because I think we've covered this to a point that we can do. Let's move on to the E-Forestry and the Biotic Pump situations, if we may.
I might start this, Sergei, and then hand it over to you. Sorry,
Okay.
Xaryab.
It is good. It is good that Raza intervened and deviated, because I think we would require more sessions on this particular topic on a separate day sometime, and because it is not only interesting, but as a person who's interested into technologies, but also because we are looking at a project, we're talking about a project that is supposed to soon land into Pakistan with these sort of advanced technologies. So it would be it would be informative for people to know of what they're to expect in the next few months landing into Pakistan. So I would request that we would have time, a bit more elaborative sessions on these this single wire concept. Please,
Yep.
if that is possible.
We can do that. We can link it with existing proposed structure, architectural structure for the project, and we can have more sort of specific discussion about how we see implementation of that. Yep.
Okay, so about water, and I'll phrase this around the Islamabad Global Leisure City project, because it's probably easiest. And I have spoken about biotic pumps before. Do you want me to talk a little bit about that now?
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit, please.
Just so everyone who's listening now is up to speed. So it wasn't long ago, and Sergei, correct me if I'm wrong, but about 9-10 years ago, some Russian scientists turned a satellite that was interrogating outer space in light years around to look at the Earth to discover where water vapor was disappearing out of a lake in Russia. Sorry, what's the lake's name, Russia? Sergei, what's the...
You mean Baikal?
No, the the lake.
Oh, okay, the sea, the Oral Sea. Yes.
Aral Sea.
Aral Sea.
A-R-A-L. It's worth Googling the Aral Sea or Aral Sea, because it was one of the largest freshwater inland lakes on the planet, and then the water started disappearing, and because it fed large agricultural areas, this became existential threat to Russia, because the food bowl was starting to fail, and the knee-jerk reaction by the farmers, because their production was going down, was to farm more land rather than to find out where the water was going and be more efficient with it. And in doing so, they damaged what is now known as the biotic pump, unwittingly. They just thought we'd grow more crops, we'll take down forestry and turn that into cropping land, agricultural land. And in doing so, by removing all the trees in the area, the trees perform a very important function, which is to transpire and cool the atmosphere above a forest. Evapotranspiration does this, and I won't go into the science because I'm pretty sure everyone in grade 4 or 5 at school learns about evaporative cooling of leaves. And but a forest can impact the ambient temperature of a region significantly, and depending on where the forest is and what the latitude and the climate generally is, you can find that the cooling effect can be anywhere from 4 degrees Celsius up to the most extreme examples, about 19 degrees Celsius, just by having a forest located strategically. And so that ties in with the fact, the scientific fact, that water vapor in the atmosphere will always move towards the colder place. So if it's colder over there, that's where the water vapor is heading, and it's going quickly. And so if you've got a cold object, the water vapor will just hang around it. And anyone who's ever enjoyed a cold beer on a hot day, or a cold beverage on a hot day, will know that the glass attracts moisture out of the atmosphere like crazy. Just it's running all over the table and over your coaster, because it's cold and it's attracting all the moisture in the atmosphere. So this is a very real thing, and you can imagine that at scale. Just one glass attracts that amount of water. Can you imagine how much a forest can attract? And so I think people underestimated this physical effect, and so what was observed by satellite was that, and I'll sort of cut out a few phases here to keep this short, but water coming down into the RLC from 3 river systems. As the water came down into the RLC, water was going back up those rivers in the atmosphere in vapor. The RLC, and so this movement of moisture going upstream was coined by these scientists as the biotic pump. And what they mean by that is that because it's cooler over the forest than it was over the sea, the moisture that evaporated off the sea headed up the river, because all the forestry on the sides of the river were basically sucking it up there. And then because it was always cooler over the forest than over the sea, more moisture would go up and more. And so it's like a pump pushing the moisture uphill. And so the moisture could go, and the biggest biotic pumps that have been recognized by these scientists was in the order of over 2,000 kilometers long. And in their minds, the length is not the issue. So long as you have a temperature gradient, the moisture will keep moving. And so hence this term, the biotic pump. It's a natural phenomenon. It happens all over the planet. But as we damage forestry close to river systems, we destroy the biotic pumps, and to our peril, because this is how moisture got into the center of continents and then could irrigate the forests and then come down all the streams, irrigate all agriculture, and end up nominally back in the oceans. So of course, reinstating forests on river systems is an important part of this. So Sergei and I observed this quite closely, and then quite serendipitously. So we started, discussing and trying to implement, the reforestation of river systems to resuscitate, if you like, damaged biotic pumps. It's a lot harder than you would imagine, because often a river system would run through lots of different political control areas, whether they're local government or state governments or even nations. So many people involved in controlling the water, and as is evidenced by water rights all over the world, it was just hard to get concert. People just didn't want to cooperate. It was hard to get everyone's attention at the same time. And so serendipitously, as good things do happen with serendipity, another technology came our way, which is I guess it can be called a geoengineering piece of equipment, but our purpose for this is to just mimic forests rather than use it for any particular purpose of weather manipulation in a general sense. These ionic wind generators, if they're scaled to mimic a forest can reignite biotic pumps without having to actually grow the forest first. And so you can appreciate the conundrum there. How do you grow a forest if you don't have water? How can you have water if you don't have a forest? Chicken and egg. And so, and what particularly seeded this in my mind was Prime Minister Imran Khan's 10 billion tree tsunami. And so, and of course, when he came to power, he inherited a 1 billion tree program that was spectacular in its failure, I must say, where 90-something% of all the trees died because of lack of water. And so, you know, the conundrum of how do you get the water to 1 billion trees, let alone 10 billion, is quite phenomenal and difficult, very difficult. And because it involves so much, traditionally, it involves so much pumping and piping that you could never afford it. And it just makes nonsense of trying to establish it in the first instance. And so, and this is where the biotic pump is such an elegant solution, because with very little effort from us, or nature is doing the work. All you have to do is understand the laws of nature and then harness them to create a situation where you can manipulate the moisture in the atmosphere. And the ionic wind generators, and I'm going to Sergei's chagrin, I think I'm going to simplify this a bit too much. It's quite complex what happens in the atmosphere, but let's just say that it mimics the cooling that a forest creates. It's not that simple, but anyway, let's just say that for the purpose of listeners. Sergei, you may want to go a little bit deeper into that, but by replacing the action of a forest, it's attracting the moisture to hydrate the landscape to grow the seedlings that will become the forest. And so these electronic devices, by attracting the moisture through the atmosphere, and we're not talking small amounts, we're talking gigaliters of moisture, can get a forest going until a forest is quite capable of cooling its own atmosphere above it, thank you very much, in which time you can turn off the E-Forest, which is our name for this particular model device, and move it to the next area that really needs assistance. And that way, then the forest that you irrigated using the E-Forest is now big enough to cool the air, to attract its own moisture, and therefore you continue the cycle. So, and it will then work every day. And what I like about the biotic pump is that it's so long as you don't damage the forest, and so long as the planet keeps rotating on its axis, it will always work. It won't ever have a power failure because the sun's always going to rise. It won't forget to do anything because there's no one behind this except perhaps the hand of God. So this thing is just going to work every day, delivering what it needs to, because the Earth's rotating, gravity exists, and moisture in the atmosphere moves towards a cooler gradient. Okay, so Sergei, do you want to elaborate or sort of add to that in any way? Because I know you understand this more deeply.
Yeah, I'd like to just widen it a little bit. Maybe somebody has questions first. I'd like to say that what Will described in terms of cooling effects of the forests is only one aspect. And biotic pump is working, and scientists, since its introduction in 1985, now working towards confirming and reconfirming the idea. And since then, they talk about Amazon flying rivers, for example, to describe how much water is moving in the clouds towards Amazonian forests because of that natural mechanism of biotic pump. They also see biotic pump as a major contributor to climate variations. But I would like to go to individual trees, and then back to forest again. since 1920s, scientists started to look at relationship between trees and electricity. And there were lots of different experiments. And what they discovered back in those days, 1925, 27, that individual trees are actually emitting some charged particles. So they've been doing the research on and off. And recently, for example, a researcher in Queensland University of Technology produced a paper where he talks about eucalypts, for example, being champions of sending charged particles into the atmosphere. And what it means that, okay, the Earth is negative, the sky, so to speak, is positive. And what are trees doing and natural ecosystems doing? They have mechanism of electric exchange between Earth and the sky. Now, and it's done by means of trees. When trees emit charged particles, negative particles, they rise up in the atmosphere, creating effect of an updraft, because there is energy exchange and there is a heating produced. And so together with cooling effect, suddenly we got heating effect, additional impact, and we have an updraft generated by that. But also charged particles, they become nuclei of precipitation. And so not only they create updraft, they create also nuclei for precipitation, droplets forming. What is normally happening in anticyclonic condition is the Earth has an inversion layer. It's roughly, it varies, but can be up to 3 kilometers high, 3,000 meters high. And when there is not enough updraft, there is no, and what is happening when the air is coming up, it's coming through inversion layer, and the temperature of inversion layer is similar to temperature of the air that comes through. The air starts circulating within inversion layer, not getting through to anything that can bring rain. And so what forests do, mature forests stand, it actually enables that breakthrough of inversion layer in certain conditions, helping to generate updraft and bring atmospheric circulation. What happens with E-Forest? E-Forest are substituting that function of electronic in forests, and so it adds to that dimension of adds to a toolbox, our toolbox, where we can manipulate. But it's not just blind manipulation. It's no good putting E-Forest in one place, not knowing where, and starting emitting those particles. We're going to make changes in the regional climatic conditions. Whatever is going to be generated in one place is going to be taken out of another. We're going to affect other regions. So it has to be done in a proper scientific way, knowing what you are doing. And so there comes a notion that atmosphere, in its movement of air, we can say that it has a habitual patterns. Those habitual patterns, they might be wrong patterns, because when vegetation was removed, atmospheric conditions changed. And that's why people who lived in the landscape for a long time often complain, saying, oh, the climate used to be different. We used to have rain, seasonal rain. Now we don't have any. Partially it's to do with, I'm in inverted commas, habitual nature of the atmosphere, in certain time, in certain season, the pattern has changed. That climatic pattern has changed, regional pattern. And if we look at the maps where relic forests used to be, where those interactions with, for example, rivers and ocean and mature forest happened in the past, that stabilized the climate, stabilized the patterns. And if we place those E-forests in a proper place, we can regenerate that habitual movement of the atmosphere. And by doing that, we will create stable seasonal conditions, stable climatic conditions of a region we're working with. We've done it in a number of places. In for example, Kazakhstan, we brought, and this is ongoing project, we brought air into arid regions of Kazakhstan, moist air and precipitation. We did similar thing in Dubai, for example. So it's dry regions. We applied similar technology in Mexico to fill up the lakes for major water supply of Mexico City. We've done a similar project in Iran, bringing moist air from Caspian Sea onto fairly arid regions of Iranian plateau. So there is a lot of experience that is already there, confirming those both theoretical and practical assertions that we're making. So that is another very interesting, but I'm urging to consider a systematic approach. There is no point putting it together. Like in China, they did testing technology, and they said, oh, well, you can go now, we can do it ourselves. Nothing happened. You've got to place them properly. You've got to know what kind of power you have to connect, not to affect other regions. You have to mimic the action of a mature forest. And that is a very important part that I think.
You said something about what was the term? Relic, yes, relic forestry, right? Yeah, relic forests. So forests that did exist but do not anymore. And this brings me to the fact that Pakistan used to be the land of milk and honey.
That's right.
And
so of people, you know,
it's dehydrated. The landscape is, you know, dehydrated, and it can't support agriculture all year, whereas it could. And this is the thing with forestry, very simply, that if you have a lot of transpiration going through a forest, you cool the day and you warm the night. And I think most research shows that if you have a stable diurnal temperature range, which means the temperature difference between night and day is less, it's very beneficial to agriculture. In fact, up to 30% more production can occur by having cooler days and warmer nights. So can I tie this back into the topic of this point to ponder about, you know, threatening technologies? And so I think Sergei and I have sort of explained a bit about the science of manipulating moisture through the air. And as I said before, we're talking gigaliters. This is not small beer. It's a lot of moisture. I think the threat doesn't live in people's minds. I think everyone in Pakistan would enjoy the thought of having, you know, the landscape rehydrated and agriculture coming back and having the land of milk and honey again, which frankly didn't take very long to change. You know, I think maybe 2 or 3 generations, and it was all over by removing trees all the time. So, and hence the 10 billion tree tsunami scenario to help unpick that. But the threat often is on the ground in industry dealing with water. And Zubi, you may want to even talk about this, that people who promote pumping and piping think you're going to leapfrog them by bringing the atmosphere through the air. I remember I spoke on this matter at a national conference on the Gold Coast here near Brisbane to the it was to the irrigation industry, and I really thought, are you suicidal, Will? Anyway, so I thought about it long and hard, and I thought, no, everyone needs to know this. And I stood up and I gave this lecture on biotic pumps, just explaining what a biotic pump was. And of course, they're all fascinated because it's a fascinating topic, and and how it was discovered and this. And then the questions out of the audience at the end of the talk were fascinating, because they were starting to put together very slowly in their mind that this was a threat to their industry, that they'd sell fewer pumps and fewer pipes. And I think I got carried out in a riot after that. No, it wasn't quite that bad. But I think it was an early warning for them that you don't need pumps and pipes to move lots and lots of water around. But that's an exact, the threatening technology of a natural science on an industry like that, when in fact it doesn't work that way. I guess, and I'm going to couch it this way and see if my logic bears out. If we're taking water from the sea, no one cares about that. No one knows the atmospheric moisture above the Gulf of Arabia. It's just there. So we're just enticing it inland, as it used to do. Okay, and then we're delivering it onto the ground, and we're putting the moisture in the ground where it belongs. Perfect place to store water is in the ground, because the evaporation is minimal, and so you can keep it there. And all we're doing is we're recharging the water tank. And once the water is stored in the ground, and we would hope up to 3 meters deep in water, so it's the freshwater lens that we'd hope to put, well, not lens so much, but just fresh water stored in the ground down to 3 meters. What that does is it gives resilience to the landscape. If you have 3 meters of water in the ground, then you can go without rain, not that you'd want to, but you can go without rain for 3 years and your trees won't die, because there's 3 years worth of water in the ground. Now I'm speaking generically, that's not necessarily the case everywhere, it depends on the ground types, etc. But let's say, and if you have 1 meter of water in the ground, then you don't, if you have a drought for 1 year, then none of the trees die, because they can all access enough water. So once you've got your water established inland, which is what we're doing, we're transferring water from out there from oceans and seas, or even large bodies of water like the Aral Sea, bringing it inland and storing it in the ground. We end up relying on the trees then to distribute the moisture every day into the crops, but that's a particular type of farming, and so that's another subject. We won't get into that. We'd never end up this conversation, but if you have that water and you can access it using pumps and pipes, there's no threat to the industry. Eventually, I would like to think that everyone because now you have a lot of water to pump. So, whereas you had none before. So, in fact, the industry prospers in that sense. This other technology of manipulating in a micro sense the moisture around a farm or around farming landscapes is something that Sergei and I have been, well, that's how we originally got together, actually, about what's sometimes called natural sequence farming. And the founder of which, or the author of this, is Mr. Peter Andrews, who got the Order of Australia Medal for his services to Landcare. His genius was in understanding this and how to manipulate moisture through the ground and above the ground to the benefit of farmers. And and I'd like to think that all farming would end up that way, but the reality is it never will, because broadacre farming is such a big thing, such a huge industry, that I think that'll continue for decades. But if anyone wants to set up a farm, and this is the intention at the Islamabad Global Leisure City, we would do it in such a way that we're not using lots of pumps and pipes. So I'm not saying we won't use pumps and pipes. They have to be used somewhere. But we can steer the water where we want it using trees. So I'm really oversimplifying this, I know. But, I've got Sergei there. I can hear his cogs going, that's too simple. But I think to get the point across to everyone, it sort of makes.
Thank you for that, Will. I think it's very fascinating, you know, and I know we've covered certain elements of it previously, but it's always refreshing to hear about it. It's just amazing how we can actually work and combine nature to benefit everybody, and especially some of these areas that are so desperately needing the water, you know, and bringing this forestry into action would just transform, and it's something that Pakistan would desperately need. So yeah, absolutely fascinating subject. Just thinking aloud, and really at some stage I would like to bring in somebody from the relevant ministries that were, you know, some of the areas that we're covering, and to get their participation in these discussions and see what their requirements are, and then start filtering into them how we can support some of their initiatives that they've already started, like the 10 billion tree tsunami, some of the water projects that we're talking about, and the whole power element to it as well. So if we could actually try and bring some of these people in on these conversations, I think it would be a good move for us.
Certainly, yeah, that would be.
It would be a good move for the, because at the moment all these discussions that we've had so far regarding the biotic and also the new technology, the single wire technology today, and which we hope to have some sort of further elaboration during the program. The thing is, for us to bring people of the state into this program is not a problem. Whenever the team, whenever you gentlemen give me permission to do so, I think it would be wise to bring them on board with some relevant people who could not only benefit from this and to make things easier for the system to be installed here, but might also help us in paving the way for this in terms of the mechanism that that we would have to follow to bring this project and so once they get the magnitude of development in so many ways, in terms of technology and in terms of expanding to the beneficiaries that we hope. I believe it is time that we start to bring one by one, because the dynamics of the system so far, the IGLC, I see that we would require people from parts of the country and the various ministries, I mean, relevant to the topic, because it covers power, it covers water, it covers forestry, it covers it covers IT, and covers banking system. So we could do plan it in a way that, for instance, if we are talking about E-Forestry one day, then maybe we would bring somebody relevant to that, and the next day we could bring the other person relevant to the other topic, and we go so that we know we have quite an elaborate understanding to the concept. What I could do is line up people according to your plan of next Tuesday. Let's say if we are to talk about E-Forestry, I could engage somebody from there, from the ministry relevant to that. And
I think so. I think it's good to start to lay the foundations with them, and ahead of them coming on, maybe they can see a summarized version of the program as well, so they know, you know, the type of topic that we are looking to pick up with them. And for them to give their perspective as well, the challenges that they're currently facing as well, because once we know what the problem is, then we can try and find solutions for them.
So
Exactly.
true. So true.
I agree entirely. Entirely agree. Because part of the problem is that we don't know the problem the way you see. We may have technology, we have general application of technology, but I wanted to add something, another dimension to it. We are talking about notion of landscape. And often what we have in a farming community or any development, we have so-called land capability assessment. We look at the landscape from anthropocentric perspective. What can we get from it? And we often forget that the landscape functions that inherited in that landscape form already a network, already a framework. And often we disrupt that framework, and then we deal with consequences, whether it's fires or floods or continuous upgrade of infrastructure in any case, or whatever, we are paying for it financially. Is it better for us to actually identify what are those elements that drive the landscape and work with them and place spatially our human systems in a way that are not going to contradict the landscape functionality. And in doing so, we are evolving a very different system. We are not saying the more farms, the better. We are saying that place would be the best for the farming. It's going to take less resources, get more harvests, and get better crops. You know, if you want to do that, that would be the best. So I think that's another area of discussion. I think we need to have at some stage, because it's not just giving technology, supplying technology, or introducing technology. It's how are we going to use the technology to benefit? Because we have lots of examples of introduction of technology causing so much problems. Just ecological disasters, full scale. But anyway, that's just a sideline that we have to keep in mind, I think.
Well said.
I think we'll plan this offline, to be you and I, and we'll maybe draft in Will and plan one of these meetings with the ministry people or from the relevant departments. Mushin, I believe you wanted to mention something.
Yes. I'm just turning back to the integrating threatening technology part, and I also want to point out that it's inevitable that new technologies develop and flood the market. I'm just gonna say one word to make that clear: Amazon, right? So, it disrupted the book market to begin with, to then disrupt retail. So, and they didn't really care about integrating. They said, everybody integrate with us, right? We're not going to integrate. You integrate with us. And there is something to that is institutive for our system. This is how our system works. To give you an example, I think this is now 10 years or a little bit more ago, I was talking to this lady of Credit Suisse who was in charge of looking at all the new disruptive technologies that started out right then. Now it's called DeFi and whatever, right? So it's much more known, all these products basically, which take away business from the banks. Like the whole small scale advice business actually can be done much better, and that's been scientifically proven. But I didn't know that, but she told me, scientifically proven, that an app can advise you financially much better than a person at a bank. And she said, this is our core business. Our core business in not towards businesses, but towards people. And then I asked, what are you going to do about it? She says, well, we're going to look at it, and then we're going to try to buy some of the companies that do this, right? So to do this for us, basically. We're going to buy them, right? And then I said, well, what if they don't want to be bought by you? Because they will be, what they will see from their point of view is, oh my God, there comes a bank, they're going to slow us down and smother us in bureaucracy, right? Which is what big companies do usually. They complexify everything. And so she said, we don't have a recipe. And she showed me this huge chart of all the competitors, all these small times competitors at that time, eating away at the bank's business. So I would say that, I'm personally on this meritocratic point of view, where I say, well, we can't avoid the development of new technologies. We can't avoid the implementation of new technologies. Now, with a global leisure city, global leisure city would give us a platform to actually introduce all of these technologies without disrupting a given existing system, and then mature some of these technologies in a systematic way. Some of these technologies, even though they're novel, like Sergei was pointing out, they are tested to the utmost, right? We know they work, we know how they work, we know what they do, and so we just cannot integrate it in the existing system because the existing system resists that. It doesn't want to be healed, it wants to stay sick because the sickness gives its own
Sustainability.
goodies, right? You get you get your own goodies. Like, some of the poorer states, they go like, oh, poor us, give us money, right? So there is something to this, to that state. Now we are aware of that, obviously. So sometimes we just have to stick with our guns and say, well, your system is broken. Your system is so broken, it cannot be renovated. It cannot be reformed. It needs to be revolutionized. And the revolution is always painful for some of the actors, or actually for most of the actors, even the ones that are the revolutionaries suffer. But basically, so let's not forget that. So it requires also some courage on the part of the people we partner with to say, yes, it's going to cause, trouble, some thinking like a turbulence in the atmosphere. And we need that turbulence to cause the rain that we want to create. So yeah.
Sorry, Mushin. I mean, JALA is in that sense, a threatening technology, as you just described. Just for the benefit of the present viewers, could you explain JALA very briefly and then elaborate how JALA is going to integrate into the Islamic Global Leisure City, Islamabad Leisure. We have to get a name for this city. I hate the word. The city. Could you just elaborate on that a bit, mate?
Yeah, just very small and very short. I just looked it up. Banking in Europe started 500 years ago, basically. That's it. Before that, we didn't have banking. Nowhere in the planet. So, given that, we now have a centralized.
The Chinese must have had banking. Come on.
They didn't have banking. They had a bureaucracy that worked since 4,000 years. And basically, you have a huge bureaucracy that administers this
Bank
money.
itself means banking.
Yeah. So the bureaucracy was the bank, if you like, but they didn't have any of the things that are typical for banking, which are creating accounts for you everywhere. Like the Florence, what they did basically was say, you don't have to carry your gold to Munich or to Cologne. You put your gold here in the bank in Venice, and then you go to Cologne, and then you withdraw from your account with our bank there. And all these transporting is done by our bank, right? Basically, guarded with our armies. So that's and since then the concepts of banking hasn't really changed. What it has done was hugely complexify. The crisis of 2008 was basically a crisis of complexification. The bank had created such Byzantine products that nobody had any clue what was included in these products, basically. And so Deutsche Bank lost something like 2 billion to American banks who were just a little bit smarter than the German bank there, and so on. So I don't want to go into that. I just wanted to say slowly what is the difference. Now, the difference between an ordinary bank and what we are doing is that an ordinary bank is part of the banking system, which is governed by the state national banks, or in the case of Europe, by the European Central Bank. And what they do is they print money, basically, but actually they export that function of creating money to the banks. Every time the bank gives you a credit, basically what they print or create is money. 90% of the money that circles the globe is not money in the way we understand it. That's just accounting things and financial products. So what we are doing is bringing it back to what it used to be. So imagine a village in the time before big banking started. What they had was a kind of a piece of wood where I gave you a chicken, and then I had a little thing in a piece of wood, which they basically accounted for that chicken, and then maybe I needed some potatoes. So it was an internal accounting system that didn't require money to work. And it worked regionally and locally in towns. This is like an old system, at least for Europe. I haven't studied how that worked in Asia or Central Asia or anywhere else, but in Europe, this is the way it worked. People were kind of making things work without money. And what they used for that was social technology, was knowing each other. Now, what JALA does is bring that back as a digital system without taking out the community aspect, but creating not a coin, basically. What we are saying is, like in the villages, they didn't create coins, they just created an accounting system, how to take account of other services and products, right? So it's an accounting system. So what JALA introduces back again is saying, well, what we need money for, just to keep things in account, to know who owes what to whom, or who promised what to whom. So you have the owing and promises, and that's all that money basically represents, like the old banking system, right? So I put my gold in the bank in Venice, and I take it out in Cologne. Well, basically is the bank promises me that it will do that, right? I can go to Cologne. So that's the promise. and then the owing is the part of the money. So what we do is create a decentralized system for owing and promising between people. Now, first iteration is simply a way of replacing money. But finally, actually, what it does, it brings back the promise owe system into into a kind of market that is open for all and not just for banks. So basically, banks have monopolized the um, the living of credits, the creation of credits, the using of promises, and we put that away. And so basically, we kind of, I think, from what I understand, that's the core of Islamic banking is non-usury and is at core is the Islamic merchants of that time that invented that system. Basically, they didn't have a police, they didn't have military, they didn't have anything except promises from each other. So the only thing they had was a social system to enforce their system. So it's a banking system that can do without the threat of violence from a state, which I think is totally elegant, and it works in a totally distributed way. So sorry, so that I took so long so to answer a simple question, what this was about. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I haven't heard you state it in that way, but that's a really lovely summary of JALA. And so, like Sergei's presentation of the single wire technology, me talking about the Biotic Pump and the E-Forestry, and Mushin about the use of money, it's kind of like earth, wind and fire, isn't it, in a sense? These are not necessarily...
What does the word JALA actually mean? What's the root word for that, or where does it originate from?
Actually, the name JALA was found by a friend of mine. When I was in Chiang Mai, we were talking about how should we call this company system, accounting system, blah, blah. And so one day he came up with that. He said JALA. He said that means water in Sanskrit. And we're all about making things liquid. So, call it JALA. And it even sounds like water, right? At least to me. So then I found out that I could get the name JALA was still available as .io, which is the .io is where or most of the financial things have gone to, because it was one address that was still quite open. So it's jala.io. And Jala
another sort of addition to your word JALA. JALA also is, like a spider's web. It actually means that as well in our language. So it has a certain Eastern connotation to it, which applies to many aspects.
I hope you like spiders in the East.
Yeah, I mean the network.
It's not necessarily the spider, but the web. So it's actually it spreads out everywhere, and it's has a certain banking connotation there.
Yeah, and I mean there is some elegance to this comparison, because when people think about spider web, they usually think about this wheel type of webs, right? That's a centralized web. This is how our internet functions at this moment, really like an old school spider web. And now then you have all these chaotic spider webs, right? Where there's no center. It just looks like chaos. To us, it looks like chaos. There are sophisticated systems to harvest whatever it is these particular spiders want to harvest or to get. So, and that's more like JALA. JALA is more like a chaotic system that, or let's call it chaotic. That's a system that was chaotic was dubbed by the guy that invented Visa, D Hoc. So chaotic, basically a system that is not chaos as in tumbling ever which way, but chaos is it's unpredictable, it is systemic, and so there is an order to the system. It's just chaotic in the sense that we cannot make it go in particular directions. Now, this is so it's interesting that this is true for JALA as well, because we're decentralized. What we can do is kind of lay out basic rules. But because it's decentralized, people can say yes or no to the rules. So our competition are our customers, really. So in the sense, because in what we create, what is called a fork is easily done. Well, not easily, but a fork can be done. So you have a system, and then it can fork into a very similar but different system, which allows people to do whatever they like. So with what we create, there's always the danger of forking, which I see as people saying, well, if they want to fork from our system, we're doing something that makes them want to do that.
Can I just
we
describe?
have to learn.
Can I just describe forking a little bit for the benefit of those who don't know what it is? It's like when JALA decides to upgrade its algorithm and it becomes JALA 2.0, then it invites everyone to upgrade, but not everyone has to. And JALA 1.0 can still happily exist and do its own thing. And JALA 2.0 forks and does its thing. So it's up to the individual, the user, to do the upgrade. And that's a fork. I thought I'd just sort of add that.
Well, thank you for that, Will. We do have one question from Hisham. He'd like to direct it to Sergei, if we may. But I am conscious of time. I know it's late in Australia. So after this one question, if we can maybe wrap things up until next time, if we may. Hisham, would you like to pose the question? Do you want to send it in writing, or would you like to come on air and pose the question?
Thank you so much, sir, for addressing my question. It's a very short question. I hope it won't take long for Sir Sergei. As he mentioned in his conversation that he has been working on projects in dry areas of the world regarding plantation. So I just wanted to know that were those projects successful, or what was the rate of success of those projects, and what were the do's and don'ts of those projects when he was carrying out or pursuing such kind of projects? So if it is not taking long, he may answer it shortly in a short manner, or he can also give me the answer in a written form afterwards also.
Hisham, can I just confirm your question a little bit? You mentioned the project, and I missed. There was a break in communication. What project did you mean? What?
I think Sergei, he refers to
that, you were carrying out in Middle East, in Dubai and in Mexico. They're dry lands, barren lands, and you were planting trees in such areas. So I just wanted to know what was the success rate of your projects that you were pursuing in such areas.
It's more related to what Will was describing about natural sequence farming, and what we've done as a company with Will, we did restoration work in a mining environment. And that restoration work was very, very successful. Successful only partially because that mine was very controversial, political, had some political issues. However, the method itself was applied numerous times by people in all regions of Australia. And what we've seen a rapid restoration of landscape within a space of 3 to 5 years. So where usual scientists were saying, oh, you need 100 years to restore that landscape, the restoration process, as long as it goes along the natural functional divisions of the landscape, has a very rapid pace. So it's incredible how rapidly. Well, I've seen It's not our project, it's not my project, but I've seen the results of similar method applied, where the land was absolutely bare, and it was converted to a land where you can put your hands and get the soil, that crumbly, beautiful soil, deep. So I don't know if I have answered your question, Hisham, or not.
Can I add to that before
Yep.
Hisham, before you answer? There's two parts to that. So the Biotic Pump or the E-Forestry is a proven system. It's moving water through the air. The projects aren't mature enough to say, are they successful enough? They look successful.
No, the projects with E-Forests are absolutely successful projects. There is huge amount of knowledge that we have to carry out those projects. It's about 30 years of experience of people on ground doing work. So with regards to E-Forests, well, just a small.
Yeah, no, we know the E-Forestry works, but it's our application of it on the ground to grow forests. We're still in process, so we can't personally say that, but we know from the history of this technology, it's absolutely bona fide. And the other thing is this, the agricultural aspect of natural sequence farming, where, and I'll give you a very quick example, in the Colorado River Ranch is a big ranch in America. And I was over there with Peter Andrews, who's the founder of this system, and we gave them some advice, or he gave them some advice. I was a passive observer. And the Colorado River Ranch looks like any cowboy western. There's a tuft of grass here and there, so about 10 to 20% ground cover. The rest is dirt, and a big river running through the middle of it, and cowboys and rattlesnakes and bald eagles flying around. You can visualize that sort of western desert, sort of semi-desert scene. And Peter explained to them how they could transform their landscape, and they, to their credit, they were very interested, and they said, well, how can we do it? And he said, it's very simple. You do this, this, and this. Anyway, we went away, and a year later, we got photographs from them sent up by email of their pastures, and 100% ground cover with grasses 3 meters high. They had to stand in the stirrups on their horses and hold the cameras up in the air to show us, because you couldn't see for grasses, and they were grazing cattle, of course. It was just a cattle station. And that was because they did this, this, and this that Peter told them to do. It happened inside a year, and it was a phenomenal turnaround. And it only happened on the Colorado River Ranch. And all the farms around them started accusing them of stealing water out of the Colorado River to create all this greenery. You could see the Colorado River Ranch from satellite as this bright green square in the middle of everything else. And of course they didn't use any water out of the Colorado River, because that was one of the things. Stop pumping water all over the ground. You're just wasting it. And so everyone settled down, and they said, well, how do you do it? Can we do this too? And it sort of led to a very simple revolution in Colorado of how to do natural sequence farming, just by observation and copying. So I hope that also helps a bit, Hisham.
Yes, I want another addition to that, Hisham. We've been, as Will mentioned, we've been privileged to work with remarkable natural scientists. Peter Andrews is one of them. What we've done, we made a system based on those empirical methods that Peter is using. A system which is transparent, repeatable, and it's open. So people can easily learn the principles and apply the system. And I think that's the major strength, our strength. We apply it in our work, in everyday work, but the system aspect is probably the most important. We are not making miracles. We're actually introducing systematic difference. That's the strength. I don't know if
you
we
very
answered
much.
the question.
Thank you very much for that, gentlemen. Once again, time is running very fast, and I think we've exceeded our time yet again. So if we can maybe conclude for today's session. And once again, I'd like to thank our guests, Mushin, Will, and Sergei as well for joining in today, and the audience for participating. Thank you very much for all your support, help with our programs. Zubi, I'll just hand it back to you.
Yeah, I would also like to thank all the gentlemen and Raza Bhai, you as well for your time. And today's session was, I mean, it did leave a bit of intrigue, and I would request all you gentlemen to at your convenient time, probably then at the same time, hopefully next week, to elaborate further on this, because there are a lot of questions and a lot of ideas that come to mind when we discuss such innovative ideas, innovative concepts, and for a country like Pakistan to be able to witness that practically and get in at par with the modern technologies, with the system probably one of its kind to be installed in the shape of a city, in the shape of a town, is no less than a miracle, I would say. And just like we mentioned earlier, that from next episodes, or whenever you gentlemen suggest, we start to bring in people who can make things happen in terms of this representing the state and the stakeholders. And if you, whenever you say, we could start bringing them over and have these discussions on a platform where these people could also probably request certain additional items for the team to bring when they formulate a proposal of a town building concept. I mean, something for Will to look into, that maybe they would probably suggest certain additional items to it, because once these sort of ideas come to play, then there are certain things that probably the state already has in mind, where they could incorporate that within the structure of your design, and make it probably more compatible for them to accept and to get it approved quickly. And also for them to plan these sort of things ahead in their annual development programs, and in their budgets, and in their planning of the state. So, but again, we would talk about that offline and see how we bring these people on board. And I thank you again on behalf of the Grey Lounge, on behalf of all the audience and the participants who were listening to this conversation, and Hisham and Sarah who participated and asked questions and discussed certain things. And I'm really looking forward to the next episode where we could elaborate further. And until then, from my side, it is farewell to all of you. And last, the way we normally do last statements, if any of you gentlemen would want to add, you can talk about that.
No, just thank you very much for the platform, Zubi. It's you've set up a wonderful thing in the Grey Lounge. So thanks for my part.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I
guys.
also want to say thank you. And just one thought that I caught in this conversation was elegance of nature. I mean, Sergei has been introducing, and will to some aspect before, the elegance of nature in doing things. And we're just kind of, so that the technologies we're using actually are kind of trying to mimic that. That's why we go on about decentralization, because nature is not centralized, and so on and so on and so on. So I really like that that even the high sophisticated digital or whatever technology we're using it in the service and within the systems of elegance of nature. So I took that. So that was really beautiful. Thank you.
I agree entirely, Mushin. I would like to say thank you for having me on the program, and I am looking forward to meeting you again. I really enjoyed the company, the conversation we had. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Until next week, it's bye-bye from our side, and have a good evening, good morning, and a good night, considering the time zones.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.